Now we have to switch to English. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the panel Regional Prospects of the Joint Crisis Intervention at the Belgrade Security Forum. Panelists are Ivana Ljubojević, Secretary of the Disaster Preparedness and Prevention Initiative for Southeast Europe. Želimir Kešetović, Professor at the Belgrade's Faculty of Security Studies. Predrag Marić, Assistant Minister, Head of the Sector for Emergency Situation, Interior Ministry of Serbian Government. And Darko Komatina, Secretary of Sava River Basin Commission. My name is Zoran Stanojević, and I'm a journalist and news editor at Radio Television of Serbia, and I will moderate this discussion. Let's begin with my personal confession. On the night of Tuesday, May the 13th, I was editing the news, the late news at 11. And around 8 o'clock, my colleague, weather girl, still a proper meteorologist, Biljana Vranić, came to me to tell me that there is an announcement of heavy rains coming tomorrow in the region. So we thought we had an agreement that she would join me in the studio at the end of the broadcast, at the end of the news when there's a time for the weather, that we will say that there is heavy rain approaching. So I was doing other things. Around 10 o'clock, she came to tell me that there is a red alert, which means that she said she has never seen anything like that over such a huge area. The almost complete Western Serbia was under red alert from weather meteorology, International Weather Meteorology Organization. I asked her, shall we lead the news with this story? And you have to know that that was the day when Prime Minister met with the most successful Serbian businessmen. Some of them are considered even tycoons. And that was the news of the day. And also it was a very dry evening. So there was not a drop of the rain for, I think, a couple of days before. And we thought that maybe it would be too much to begin with the news with the story of the coming weather whatsoever. So we had the story, we had this conversation at the end of the broadcast. Biljana mentioned heavy floods, even she mentioned Noja. I thought that was way too much. And in the morning, I remember the first thing in the morning was that I heard the drumming of a heavy rain. That's basically what woke me up. And my first thought was, good. We didn't overplay. I never thought, even then, I never even added up. She told me about 200 liters per square meter. And I never thought about the volume of the liquid that is going to fall on Serbia. Even that we had this announcement, I don't think anybody has taken it seriously. Now the things are quite different. Now we're paying attention to the news and alerts coming from meteorologists, but the real question is for how long? So that is probably the good entry into this panel. And my first question would be directly primarily to Mr. Marić, but others can also join. If you knew, instead of a couple of hours before the rains, if you knew for, let's say, 2 weeks in advance that there is going to be a terrible weather with probably floods and everything, what would you do?
So thank you very much for that question. I think nothing more than we do during this period, because we send alert for all local municipality in May 12th. And alert about the flooding, but we don't know how many difficult will be, because it's a weather report. But you know, weather report in Serbia 2 weeks ago, I don't believe in that at all. So we send all our capacity to area with flooding. We do our best, not only the Sector for Emergency Management, Army and Gendarmerie. That's whole capacity in the state. I think it's a question about prevention, about capacity, building capacity in Serbia. I think it's the right question. Maybe in the future we can do much better in that position, but right now I don't think so.
If I say that you said we cannot have a proper forecast for the next 2 weeks, but theoretically, and hopefully not, in 2 weeks we may have another disaster.
Yes.
What would you do? I mean, what are you doing on a daily basis, and what would you like to do in order to be ready for this coming disaster maybe in 2 weeks?
I strongly believe that we do our best, but that's not enough. That's the question. This is the main point. I think we don't have prevention in Serbia. We don't have enough money on prevention. That thing must change. It's a political will, actually, for that, and we do our best. I strongly believe in that.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Komatina.
Thank you. Regarding the forecast, I can say that, I mean, it is usually said by meteorologists, and I guess Biljana would agree with me, that, say, a reliable forecast can be given only within 5 to 7 days maximum. I mean, 7 days to 9 days is enough time for the whole atmosphere to change, and it is unpredictable. So forecasts for 2 months in advance are based on completely different methodology.
Statistics, but this is out of
Right.
statistics.
Yeah, right.
So the question for all of you is, when actually the crisis starts? When you have this rain starting, or when somebody says, there is no need to invest in research because this disaster is unexpected in this area, Mr. Kešetović?
Yes, thank you. Well, the first lesson in crisis management is that the NOAA started to build a boat before the rainfall. A question is a little bit hypothetical. Would it be different? Would we react a little bit different with these lessons learned or with this experience? But I'm afraid that everything would be more or less the same. Why? Because Peja just mentioned prevention is very, very important. There are a number of system measures like regulating water flow, maintaining the objects on the banks of the river and so on. Cleaning, yes. And of course, our alarm systems in Serbia are in very bad condition. The level of awareness of the people also. So this needs, all of this, it needs time and money. When I was attending a seminar in Sweden, our professor said why Sweden has so robust crisis management system. He said, well, it is a matter of awareness, of including citizens, sharing responsibility. That's the one side of the story. And the second is no money, no funny. I mean, you cannot work without resources. And I'm afraid that in Serbia particularly, but in the region as a whole, in the mind of our political actors is, no one won the elections on the crisis that didn't happen. So why should we invest when we don't have to? The logic is, the crisis won't hit me here during my mandate and so on. After me, let it be the flood. So it is a problem in our mind, in our perception.
Then.
Thank you. I agree with this, but let us put a little bit more optimism into this discussion. I think that we are more clever now than we were in May on regional level. Talking on a regional level, I can tell you that the Sava River Commission organized urgent ministerial meeting of the Sava River Basin countries in June this year, and we could recognize really the high level of understanding on the highest political level, and also probably better awareness of what can happen in near future again. And it happened, actually. In Croatia, 2 weeks ago, you also had floods. And I remember at that ministerial meeting, the Croatian minister said, I've been minister for 2.5 years, and this is, I mean, the May flood was the 5th flood. He was told it had 100 years return period or more. So 5th in 2.5 years, which is really exceptional. And yeah.
Ivana, have we changed our mindset a little bit since those floods? Because you are communicating with most of the people in the region.
Well, I have to be very positive when it comes to how the region thinks. And I mean, Mr. Marić is sitting here. There hasn't been any change because this kind of awareness existed before. I mean, the region is very much aware. And these people, especially the people working in the national disaster management agencies and even the wider national protection and rescue system, they're all very much aware. And they have wonderful ideas of how they would be changing their systems if they can, and how they would be improving and even networking more and standardizing their procedures altogether. And this is what we have the EU for. They're pushing all these countries, they're channelizing them in the process of the European integrations, that they have to, as much as possible, harmonize their procedures, because that is the way to the quicker response. Disasters are going to be happening. You cannot prevent them. What you can do is basically lower down this crisis moment, because the crisis begins when you have the set of difficulties in people's understanding of what can happen. That's already a crisis. And if you don't have the awareness at the top political level, and you don't in the region, I mean, you don't, but that kind of memory is very short term, I believe so, yeah? So, yeah.
But my question would be, why do we, I mean, because you said that there is a great awareness, especially that the people, among professionals, but why do we, who are not professionals, always think that we were not ready for the disaster, and we're asking the professionals, how come that we are so unprepared for this? I mean, how do you explain that? Mr. Kešetović and then Mr. Marić.
Okay. Well, it is a problem. I fully agree with the level of awareness among the professionals. There is a lack of awareness among politicians and among ordinary people. You know, in Obrenovec, during evacuation, people didn't want to leave their homes. They were not afraid. They were not aware how dangerous it is, what is coming. And that is a problem, I'm afraid.
But why? I mean, do you have any explanation of Mr. Marić?
Yeah, I think it's education. It's the main problem in Serbia for almost 30 years, 35 years. Our children don't study anything about this.
About disasters,
yes,
or what?
About disasters. You know, it's a terrible thing. In past 5 years, we do a lot of talks with guys from, but government, but no, nothing is happening. I think it's a huge problem in Serbia. You know, the level of security, in mind.
The sense of security. Yes. And
thank you.
And also I'm open for the questions, but you have to wave to me because I'm not looking properly, so I'm going to move a little bit in this direction.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think that we didn't make use of all opportunities on the regional level still to improve exchange of information, warning from one country to another one that the flood wave is coming and so on. And
what's stopping us?
What
is stopping us from exchanging this information?
Nothing really. Actually, the Sava River Commission with the countries, actually, or better to say, the countries with coordination of the Sava River Commission developed protocol on flood protection in the Sava River Basin, which regulates all key activities in the regional flood prevention and protection in the Sava River Basin, starting with planning, joint planning of measures, which means that the countries, hopefully in 2 years, will agree that Bosnia and Herzegovina will invest some money and build some low dams in the upstream sections of the Sava River Basin to protect Serbia, to reduce risk to Croatia and Serbia, because tributaries go to Croatia, to the Sava River, and then to Serbia. So there is room for improvement in this regard. Also, there is no joint flood forecasting and warning system. So, I mean, there are national systems, but there is no joint flood forecasting and warning system. And fortunately, after the May flood, I mean, that is one of the good consequences, is that European Commission has approved funding for implementation of such a project, development of flood forecasting and warning system for the whole Sava River Basin. And the implementation will start soon. So also exchange of information. I mentioned to you earlier this morning that on the 17th of May, it was Saturday, early morning, when I was woken up by a deputy minister from Croatia, who called me and said, okay, I prepared trucks with aid for Serbia, but I do not know the address where to send the trucks. So I had to immediately call the authorities in Serbia to connect them, and also with Bosnia and Herzegovina, we had communication on the same topic on the same day. So this protocol on flood protection will also define all the focal points for communication 24/7 in such situations. So I'm not talking about the responsibilities of each individual country, but I want to say that there is still space for improvement, that one country can inform the other that floods are coming, and that may help in
how can we
reducing
do that
risk.
better, Ivana? I mean, this communication.
Well, not just the information exchange in terms of what's going to happen in 2 weeks, but I mean, you also have to bring it back to the risk communication. Like, you have to have the system established for the countries to actually communicate what the possible risks are. And this is where we are talking about the risk assessment, but we will come to that question later on. Unfortunately, I think that in the region we are still very much focused on this institutional interconnection between the countries. And, you know, is it because Mr. Marić would be able to receive very quick information from another head of the National Emergency Management Service, and the people as well working underneath Mr. Marić? So this kind of communication is easy flowing. You know, you will always be able to receive information. But in terms of a much higher level of the information exchange, well, in the area of prevention and preparedness in terms of the education system and the trainings, DPPI will be developing even further in that respect, and we hope that we will be sort of strengthening this platform that we have in the region, so that the people can interconnect, and that the network of this kind of exchange will be more widened. But in terms of the databases and in terms of the actual speedy flow of information, if those databases that could be ready available for these countries to approach, some of the countries in the region have established those kinds of databases, and but I believe that you know, it all depends on the resources that go into one country or not. One country needs to be eligible for a certain project within which they can develop that kind of system. So it's a slow process, but in terms of the awareness of these countries that they need it and that they need to exchange at a higher level, that exists. Again, I'm repeating myself, but it does exist.
Is this awareness greater now after the floods in May, when we all learned that disasters are happening even to us? And when I say us, I don't mean just on Serbia, but Bosnia and Croatia, Predrag, and then.
Yeah, I think so. It's much better than before. about awareness, and you know, I must say one thing about it. I think it's historical acts. You know, we have Croatia teams in Serbia, we have Slovenian teams in Serbia. We helped Slovenian during the April. Yes. It's the first time after the bloody war in former Yugoslavia. I think it's a kind of awareness. It's a kind of coordination. I'm very, very happy because of that.
Thank you. I also think that the awareness is higher than it was before, but it is the awareness of the fact that floods can come again. But I would like to say that the awareness raising should go primarily in future, primarily in the direction of teaching people that levees are not the only way of protecting against floods. That is, or let me recall one, or actually in all books on flood management, you will see the first sentence, there will always be a flood that will overtop your levee. So it is called a passive measure of flood protection. There are a number of active measures of flood protection, and I think that awareness raising in future should be directed into this direction, like building dams, low dams. I mean, trying to evenly distribute water and holding the water back over the whole river basin. That is the main approach.
Professor?
Yeah, awareness is higher than it was, it's obvious. But what will be in 5 years? We forget things. That's the problem. What is important, as Dan said, is to translate this awareness and these experiences into procedures, into practice, into education, into system. That is important thing.
Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to say, I mean, the countries through the Sava River Commission are going this direction, and they will develop a joint flood risk management plan, which will be fully in accordance with the flood directive of European Union. But more than that, it will bring consideration of all possible measures for prevention of floods, including the active measures, building dams, also creating retention areas along the river, relief channels along the cities or beside the cities to protect localities, and so on. So protection by levees is the last thing that should be done in modern flood management. And I hope that this flood risk management plan, which should be finalized in 2017, in 3 years from now, will really include a modern approach to strategic thinking on how to reduce risk to floods in the whole Sava River Basin.
But what you... Sorry. Can we get the microphone, please? And
the name. Faculty of Security. Do you provide the money for that plan? Because in each country in the region we have nice plans. Now we organize in Serbia. I will speak in some few sentences about the Serbia. We reorganize the system in an appropriate way. We adopt all of our rescue capacity in one sector. From the Ministry of Defense, from the Ministry of Ecology and some other ministries, now we reorganize and we are ready to do all plans. We are faced with a lack of money. With the May, you mentioned what we learned from the May. We learn a lot, professionals learn a lot. And the politicians and the ordinary people, they expect a stronger reaction of the sector and all its state institutions. How to react without money? How to react when Mr. Marić, as a paradigm of the sector, has, let's say, tracks which are older than 40 years, I think. All the equipment, lack of personnel, lack of money, lack of everything. And what to do in future? Sorry.
Okay, thank you for the question. You won't believe, but the answer is yes, we do. Yeah, we insure money. We have already done that and insured money for implementation of the flood risk management plan, joint for the whole Sava River Basin, which will be implemented fully in accordance with the flood directive and will include development of flood risk, flood hazard maps, also program of measures that the countries agree upon on the Basin level, July. Next week we'll participate in the meeting again in Brussels on how to best implement the money that has been, say, announced or promised by international community on the donors conference. So this money is huge, actually, and I think the main task is to optimize the use of these resources into different activities, and we will certainly go for best possible use of money for these purposes. So for joint planning, for strategic planning on the Basin level, because it was recognized by EU as the only way, actually, only sustainable way of planning protection or prevention of floods. Yeah, okay.
I wanted to ask Ivana, is the money problem for the region as well?
Of course it is. I mean, DPPI is sort of has a very simple politics. We have a very fixed annual contribution coming from the governments of the member countries, and it's a very low one in terms of what we want to do with that kind of money. And it's not a secret. It's actually 25,000 euros per each country. Serbia, for example, this year. And I'm not trying, I am Serbian, but I'm supposed to be regionally oriented. I'm not actually being subjected here, but this was the country who actually paid in the contribution first, much before the deadline for the payment. And then we had the flooding coming in. And the first thought that I had was like, should we, I mean, this is a situation that we couldn't count on. Should we return that money to Serbia? But I mean, when I talked to my colleagues from Mr. Marić's department, they said, I mean, no, we need to keep that money for what the purpose of that money is. Like, you know, we actually planned it. This is the actual purpose of the money. It's going to go into the prevention purposes. Is it the trainings? Is it the larger exercises? But it has to be there for that purpose. The money is the problem, of course, but I think that, you know, as long as you have this willingness and idea to actually want more and to try to implement whatever your idea is with that little money, the landscape is good in the minds of the professionals. But when it comes to the greater money, I mean, when I talk to Peđa about, you know, the financial problems that the National Emergency Management Service of Serbia has, I can't even think of, you know, going somewhere in Serbia and asking for money for DPPI, because it's ridiculous. I mean, I'm going to lobby for the money for DPPI, whereas my country, not my country, but any other country's DPPI, has no money to refresh the uniforms for its firefighters.
I want to thank you to Professor Jeftić for this question. It's a question of national capability. I'll be very open. We don't have a budget for almost 2 years. Do you believe in that? For almost 2 years. Yeah. No money for the sector, no money for equipment, for uniforms, anything. It's okay. It's rough times for everyone, but I think we must change something about that. You know, in political will, and you know, right now, next year we want to create the system of civil protection in Serbia, and I'm a little bit angry when somebody asks me, we don't have civil protection. It's not true. They exist, but we don't have money to buy uniform. Exactly. It's the whole problem. It's the main problem. Yeah. 8,000 people, young people, are in the system of civil protection right now. Nobody knows anything about that because nobody goes in the fire, in the floods, because we don't have money for uniform, believe me. I must say that because I'm a little bit angry about that.
Professor.
On the other hand, there is money for a spy satellite from Israel, and no one suffered the consequences about that, and there is not enough money for rescue boats.
It's a matter of priorities. Just the microphone, and I wanted to ask you now. I didn't want to push Predrag to say, does he have any proposals how to collect that money? But let me ask you: do we assess dangers in a proper way? I mean, you mentioned that there is no levy high enough to stop the flood, but I can say that levees are even worse when it comes to Ebola epidemic. So we're talking about floods now, but the floods are just one of the possible disasters that can hit us. What is the common thing for all disasters that we should think of?
Well, risk assessment is very important, and on the level of Serbia, we have a kind of risk register which is a little bit outdated. It is now being refreshing. It is very important, and professionals are doing that. They are actually they plan to do risk assessment on the municipality levels, then on the level of district, and then on the national level. So it's a kind of bottom up and top down approach, a kind of combination, and it will be done, I think, very soon. Yeah. But you know, professionals are aware, but so what we're going to do, and with what resources? That is very one thing is the knowledge, the awareness of professionals, and the other is PR things, and you know, spinning and lobbying for the money, and pushing the politicians. You know, you might lose the election. It is also, I mean, it's very connected with the question of responsibility. No one suffered the consequences for bad crisis management in this country. We have Prime Minister killed in front of the government building, and no one suffered the consequences. In Lithuania, the roof of the fell down, and the government fell down. So it is you know, the politicians have to be aware that if we do bad crisis management, then we will lose next elections.
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, and this is journalist asking, not the moderator, is who is going to tell us that we didn't fulfill everything that we could? I mean, because I wouldn't say if somebody, if the politicians tell me that they did a great job, I mean, I'm not the one who is going to tell them, no, you didn't.
That is a very important question. I mean, we had the complete disaster in May, and there was no, as far as I know, there was no even professional debate about the things, maybe on the headquarters, but in public there was no sound about that, and we didn't have parliamentary debate and public debate as well. And I mean, you don't have even the basic data about what happened, what worked, what didn't work. And you can now go to the website and see every detail about the London bombing. You can read about the profile of suicide bombers, about the organization, everything. But 50 pages.
As an academic, what would you do with those data?
Well, you can analyze. I mean, you can transform the system based on the lacks, what works, what doesn't work, and so on. And, of course, with the responsibility of the politicians. It's the necessary precondition for any serious change, in my opinion.
I agree. I think it's a question of responsibility. It's not very popular in Serbia at all, you know.
Is it regional, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, but you know, we want to change the law about the emergency situation in the part of responsibility. We actually wait for the answer about the status of sector for emergency management. Is it some direction for emergency management, like you know, like a body for directly responsibility to Prime Minister, or part of Ministry of Interior, or part Ministry of Defense? It's an open question right now. But I think, yeah, we must change the law, because responsibility is a key word in this area.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just one example, very briefly, before the question. In the Sava River Commission, we are developing a number of protocols that are supposed to be international legal frameworks for cooperation on different water-related issues. And I can tell you that the countries, as Predrag said, tend to be lazy. I mean, when moving forward in this direction of conclusion of protocols that actually bring additional obligations to each government. But what we are doing permanently is pushing the governments. I address the governments every 2 months with the question, okay, is there anything new? What is new? Are you ready for final negotiations on the protocol or not yet? And so on. And applying continuous pressure is actually the way of doing that. Because conveying the messages of the academic community is, I would say, the only way is actually a permanent effort to raise awareness of political community.
Just a short, because we have about 3 questions from the first one here.
Thank you. My name is Maja Bjeloš from Belgrade Center for Security Policy. My question goes in line with your discussion, but I will rephrase it a little bit. The thing I'm interested in to know is what kind of police and military we need in Serbia and the region. Meaning, if we have in mind that we are short with the money or the budget is rather decreasing than increasing, should we then invest more in special units fighting terrorists and extremists, or maybe we should invest in sector, meaning emergency management sector, or in the case of Ministry of Defense, should MOD invest more in buying new airplanes, or should they invest more in buying equipment necessary for a proper natural disaster response? That's one.
Okay, thank you, because I think maybe it's a question for Professor Kešetović, but I think it's a question of what is the main risk in the future in Serbia. I think it's an emergency situation, I think it's terrorism. We must change something, we must put the money in those areas. About the army, I think army, Mr. Professor Jeftić is here, is know so much about that. It's the 3rd mission of our Serbian army. I think it's a great thing for Serbian people. I think Ministry of Defense must put a lot of money in those areas. But I think, yeah, we, after Albania, Serbia have 3,100 firefighters. It's unbelievable. Professor?
Well, it's a kind of division of labor among the actors. What should police do? What is their core business? And how it should be organized to be most effective? I think we have in Serbia a very serious problem with the reform of police, which we formally launched in year 2000, but I'm afraid that the results are not very promising so far. I mean, you know, we have very centralized police model. We have a number of left problems like politicization of police, like a number of non-operative stuff in police and so on. On the other hand, what we need here is agency that should deal with disasters, with crisis management in narrow sense. I'm very suspicious about the possibility for Mr. Marić to do business when he's not the owner of the money, when he's under the roof of Ministry of Defense, of Police, whatever. I think that autonomous agency.
You should have a dedicated budget for.
Of course, and he should be the owner. He doesn't have to go to minister. You know, boss, we don't have uniform for civil protection. We don't have the tires, winter tires for our trucks and so on. So,
if I can just add, I mean, this is what I mentioned when we were talking in the preparation of this panel. Like the financial protection against disasters is something that is the pillar of what can happen afterwards once a disaster strikes. So in case like the World Bank, for example, they've been promoting different solutions, but I don't think that all of those are implementable here. But for example, to have the special disaster fund, for each country. And in my opinion, that kind of special disaster fund, I don't really care who is going to be in charge, like what is the name and the surname of that person. But on the other hand, I think that should be the emergency management center and Mr. Predrag Marić. Because who knows how it is.
And his counterparts in other countries.
Well, exactly. I mean, and it is up to him to decide what are the other stakeholders who should be involved in how the money is going to be distributed. Academia is, again, the key player in that. And those people should be much more networked and connected from the academia in the future, because those people should be involved, literally the people from the universities and the scientific society, to make the best platform for future disaster risk management. That is definitely, again, together with the professionals. That should be the two-way street. This is the only way that the government itself could be put in front of these people and told, I'm sorry, people, but there is no more joking about this. So we had it 5 years ago. So what? It means that we're never going to have it again? No way. So, and academia, I think, is basically the most useful tool in making it possible for the memory to be the long-term memory. And this is what we need you for, and Mr. Marić as well.
Professor, if you can add on this, but we have 3 questions waiting.
Only about the question of terrorism. I mean, after 9/11, you know, it's very fashionable to talk about terrorism. We have more experts for terrorism than any other small country, I think. But on the other hand, when it comes to a war on terrorism in such small country, I think that the focus should be on intelligence service, on intelligence information agency. We cannot fight with tanks and airplanes against terrorists in Serbia. I'm suspicious about that means generally, even we see the outcomes on American war on terrorism. There is no Al-Qaeda, but now we have Islamic State and so on. But I think in this country we can have one specialized unit for reaction, but the prevention and intelligence is the focus.
3 questions. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That will be the order. Sorry.
Hello, Marko Milošević, BCSP. Question, well, I believe for Mr. Marić, but national strategy on emergency situations envisage action plan on implementation. I wasn't able to find this action plan online. Does it exist or not? If it doesn't exist, how much does it hamper the efforts on implementation of the strategy? So, your comment on it.
Thank you. It's an important question. No, we don't have action plan because we don't have money for action plan. It's true.
No fun.
Zoran?
My name is Zoran Olimpić. I come from the local government. And my question is actually about the early warning system. I mean, just early warning for the first few hours. On the beginning, we hear this interesting story from Mr. Stanojević about his decisions in the evening news, but I don't think it should be his decision. What was the problem in May? It was, the rain was falling for 3 days without stopping. You were telling us about, I think, the evening of 13th, but what
Tuesday,
happened?
there was no rain then.
What was 14th, 15th? Yeah. The mayors, as I know, received some SMS messages that there will be floods and there is a danger. But, when you are mayor, you turn off the TV, the radio, and there is nothing about it. This is not the news for the end of the evening news. It was a risk for the mayors to be very shy in this because, they could be guilty for unnecessary panic. What do I want to say? Maybe you or someone in the ministry should have the red button. And when you press this button, this should be the news number 1. I know we have the early warning system because I know it from 15 years ago. We had very good early warning system with sirens everywhere. We know, we heard the sirens.
Okay, let's hear the answer.
You know, we know the people that live along these rivers, these torrent rivers, they should be, they expect to be warned at least a few hours before.
I think it's an early warning system practically don't exist, really. 500 million dinars is needed to do something about that, but it's the responsibility of local government right now. Actually, right now, the Belgrade do something about that, but in the other part of Serbia, not. It's true. The second thing is responsibility of mayor. You know, I met almost every mayor in Serbia. It's a smart guys, it's not smart guys, it's everything. But you must learn. You must heard what the Service for Emergency Management said. We say 2 days before for everyone. But you know, I must talk about that for almost 4 hours if you want, because experience it's huge. It's everything inside. But I agreed. Yes, we must hurt. We must do something. But we must change the system about the prevention, about the money. It's a political will.
Yeah. Professor.
One more important thing is the trust and credibility of the communicator. A few years ago, when it was pandemic of H1N1, then Minister Tomica Milosavljević called people, you should vaccinate yourself, and around 2.5% of the population did so. In Sweden, it was like 70%.
Question. Oh, sorry, Ivana first, but then question.
Very short. Your question should be definitely addressed to all the countries in the region. It's pretty much the same. The early warning system in the region is at a very low level of development. I mean, the more we go to the west, we can actually change the picture and the landscape changes, but very gradually. But I mean, if we start from Croatia and then go, you know, a little bit further to the east and north and south, we are facing pretty much the same situation. So Serbia is not the only one.
Yeah, just to add to this, but still there are emergency rooms in Slovenia and Croatia, at least for flood emergencies, and not in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I guess in Serbia. Yeah.
Just briefly, should you use mass media more as early warning system when there is a possibility like this was the case?
So it's very important, but we do that actually, but not enough. You know, you are a journalist. You decide what is the news number 1, what is the news number 2.
Gatekeeper.
I might change my opinion if somebody calls me and tell me, listen, there is a disaster coming, because we did that only because I had discussion with my colleague and she told me this is going to be huge. And even then, I wasn't quite sure, should I trust methodologists?
You know, Zoran, your colleagues called me and I told him.
Right. Well, just to add, like in terms of the prevention, I'm sorry, I have to say this because it's gonna flip. For example, Serbia, as a member country of DPPI, organized a very interesting training, the 6th one in the row in DPPI, cave rescue training, 2 weeks ago. Yeah, the speleologists and the people, the firefighters, professional firefighters were coming to that training and were trained on how to save the people that are somewhere deep underground, and we are talking about a 200-meter deep caves. The media was and had been informed. I think that each and every channel of the national television was not the national, but I mean all the media in Serbia. They had been informed that there is a training going on, and this is the first time that Serbia is organizing such training. No one came. I was there. Trust me, and I am the evidence that this call to them had been repeated so many times.
When is the next
And
training?
this was the regional training, Zoran, and this was the regional training, and you had 10 countries of the region coming to participate and to be trained by 2 countries, Slovenia and Serbia. And then how many days afterwards we had a situation with the miner who was trapped at the very same location where our training was, Strmošten. So, I mean, you have to put, like, the media needs to put the focus on the prevention part. And this is what we are doing. These are the little steps, like the cave rescue training within DPPI is such a little pearl in what these countries are doing in the preparedness and prevention field. But it's very important. Again, the media is much more interested in disaster response and the criticism that they want to share with all of us regarding the response.
My name is Dejan Kešetović. I'm regional coordinator for International Organization for Migration for Central Asia. I'm not in the country already the last 10 years, but still I would like actually to emphasize there is a more organization that you know that actually dealing with immigration and dealing with emergency. IOM actually have a 70% budget, and our organization have the biggest part is Department of Emergency. And in that sense, we actually also develop certain tools that each government can use. And Serbia, but not only Serbia, all countries within the region are the member states of IOM. It was called Migration Crisis Operational Framework. And it's not reinventing the wheel, but it's like a wheel, 15 service area that each government can activate before, during, and after disaster. What service area will need to be activated depends on emergency, because now we're discussing a lot about the floods. Floods, because understandably, because we had a 2 severe one in the last couple of months, but also we had a earthquake in Kraljevo a couple of years back. Tomorrow will be another one. Basically, every emergency have one joint component. This is displacement of the people. There's the reason why IOM is involved in all of this. And there is no significant difference in response. Concerning the government response, doesn't matter which type of disaster we needs to cover. And in that sense, actually, I just would like to underline that absolutely is correct. We need to have first the legal norm, what you were saying, then we need to know to which form we are responding. And this is a different. In Central Asia, they have the ministries. This is Ministry for Emergency. Some of them have a different form, like kind of an agency, but with a separate budget. That's absolutely correct, that they can activate. And the reason why they actually have something like this, because every 20 years, they have severe earthquake that actually leveled the capitals in Central Asia. And also what is important to see, are we building also the regional hub or not? And how respond? Because there's not any single country that can respond by its own resources and have a displacement bigger than 50,000 people. And the big emergencies do have bigger on 50,000 people emergencies, meaning displacement. This is something that actually also we need to know and need to how to respond. I just actually here underline the things what other organizations doing, and this will not reinvent anything. It's also referring which cluster scheme needs to be activated from UN and how the thing should be responded. I mean, there is certain things that we can activate when we have such a situation, but actually the government needs to be informed about it, because somebody sit when this vote for this resolution in November 2012, meaning government did voted for this particular resolution, for example. Thank you.
I would like to add a question before I give the microphone here. We know that disasters usually doesn't stop on the country border, but do you have problem in cooperation, helping others because of the borders, and what is the experience of in European Union? What is their practice? I mean, is there anything to be learned from European Union? Who's going to answer first? Ivana.
In terms of disaster response, I mean, in terms of the very concrete obstacles, probably Mr. Marić can give us some examples that Serbia faced in May. But in terms of the Europe, I believe that most of the audience here heard about the EU civil protection mechanism, and there is the whole EU civil protection legislation that basically provides the framework within which each and every segment of disaster management cycle should be implemented. And this EU civil protection legislation has changed recently. Actually, it has been amended, and in a very good way, in the sense that now it has put more focus on prevention and preparedness. And when I say more focus, I always mean money. Yeah? So we are talking now about some new additional funds that will be made available within the EU that would be covering the activities of the prevention and preparedness. In terms of the legislations, in European Union, the EU civil protection legislation gives you the framework. You cannot really, step aside from it as much as you want. You can have your own national specificalities, like, special kinds of deviations from that legislation, but you cannot make them extreme. Because if you are a member of the EU civil protection mechanism, and let's say that the whole of the EU is, and Serbia is becoming one as well, because the countries that are potential candidate countries can join in, you cannot invent your own legislation, like, in the way that you want.
So are you saying that the region should implement European model?
No. What I'm saying is that that's not even questionable. I mean, we are. I'm not quite sure, like, if you think that I said, like, whether it should be copied. I'm not talking about copy pasting. I'm talking about making it sure, and this is what the region is doing. I mean, there hasn't been many information about it, but this is what Serbia is doing, and all the other countries. They are using the EU guidelines, and they are actually adapting them to the system that they already have as much as they can. Again, it's a slow process. The risk assessment, for example, Serbia has been using EU guidelines, EU methodology for making the risk assessment. Because once it goes into the EU civil protection mechanism and once it becomes the EU member, there will be no time for doing a quick risk assessment and adopting the EU guidelines. This is the way, this is the process.
Thank you. The protocol on flood protection that I mentioned before is introducing the EU flood directive into the obligation for cooperation of these countries, including non-EU member states such as Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro as well. But this protocol is much more than the EU flood directive. It, for example, it stipulates procedures for exchange of information, which are not directly stipulated by the flood directive. It also includes measures for mitigation of transboundary impacts, which is not mentioned in the flood directive. Also, possibilities for mutual assistance of the countries in flood emergency situations. So I would also say that the countries are pretty much advanced.
In understanding.
Right.
And then in how to...
Right. Of course, now we need some time to be able to start implementing all these. But in thinking, it is, I mean, the countries are really advanced and recognize not only EU regulation, but also specificities of the region.
If I can be more practical, what happens to the paperwork during the emergency? Because I'm sure you cannot just sit in an emergency truck full of expensive equipment and drive from Belgrade to Slovenia just saying, oh, we are in a hurry.
You know, I think it's a very, very good coordination and very good understanding between us. And Ivana knows more about that because it's better than political coordination.
But still you have to stop at the customs.
No, actually, 2 weeks ago, I think we helped Croatia to do something about that. It's one phone call. It's not something big. It's very good.
And can I just, I mean, I don't want to take away what Mr. Marić can share with you about his team. But I know all those people in Mr. Marić's team, and I know all the other people in all the other teams of the countries of the region. Yeah? What happened in May was something that I stayed impressed, like completely taken aback for a couple of days. There were like, I don't know how many people, 10 maximum.
Yes,
10 maximum in Serbia, in the emergency management sector, who are very much involved with the international coordination in Serbia. And we had that many people managing the host nation support of Serbia for 22 teams from 14 countries. You cannot even imagine what kind of work that is. I can tell you theoretically because I went through the whole cycle of trainings of the host nation support. And I can tell you that even on those couple of slides that we were shared every day, I could see it's a handful. You can't manage that with 10 people. But they did it. I called to say, can I come in and just do something? And he told me twice, no, Ivana, we're handling it. So this is something that has to be recognized. We cannot only, and this is something what the governments need to see. This is the first thing that has to come into their minds. Like when the disaster ends and when we are actually in the recovery phase or reconstruction phase and now we are only talking and they're all worried how they're going to pay for it, where they're going to find the money. You still need to go back to the fact that your country handled the very first response. And now you have to invest in making it possible for them to respond even better. The human capacity is one thing. Equipment is the other. And I'm just going to share with you very shortly a very good news that there is going to be an IPA regional program on flood response. I think the implementation is going to start 2015. I'm not quite sure. But there is finally going to be a section that is going to provide heavy equipment for these countries, Serbia included.
We have the question here.
Thank you. Vladimir Recek, BCSP. I just wanted 3 questions, short if I may. First one is for Mr. Marić. Is there any significant change in the political thinking on emergencies now? Because you talked about the budget, we saw cuts for your sector in the previous 4 or 5 years. Will there be cuts this year? Because there is an investment line and there is also your regular sector line. They were all cut last several years. Will they be cut again?
May I answer? Right
Yes,
now?
yes, of course.
I think, fortunately, yes. The answer is yes. They cut our budget in 2014 also. We must wait for 2015. And I hope if we talk about that in 2020, with the beer and the stick, we wait for the money, But I think something is changed, not fast, really slow. And we will see until the end of the year about I talked earlier about that, about the status of the sector. Because, we are part of Ministry of Interior. Number 1 in Ministry of Interior is police. It's a huge system. We have 4,000 people among 40,000 people. I strongly believe that we must create some service directly responsible to Prime Minister. Like Professor said, we must control our money and do something. But right now, we're waiting for that political will.
Yes, thank you for your response. Can you, this is the question for all the panelists, how can you explain such poor preventive measures that were taken for defense of tent? That's a huge critical infrastructure object, maybe most important object in Serbia.
Yeah, I would like to say something about
This is your moment.
We are a small country. We are a poor country. We have 3 companies who do something about the flooding: Serbia Vode, Vojvodina Vode, Belgrade Vode, and I think it's unbelievable. That is the answer for your question. The question of responsibility, the question of organization. With my mind, I don't understand that, really.
Sorry, that's the most important question. The responsibility is nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
I mean, even on the local level, to the top government level. With this, I just wanted to ask a third question: how much is what is the cost of repairing one siren, emergency siren?
I think 550 million dinars it's needed right now to
for a single unit.
No.
But what would be for the single unit? Do you have the assessment?
I don't have those information, but it's a responsibility of local self-government, not our sector. But we analyze everything, and when Mr. Zoran asked the question about that, yes, I think it's not exist, unfortunately, right now. Very little part exists of those systems. It's unfortunately the truth.
We're getting now to the more practical questions, while we still have other things. I haven't asked Professor about these European models that can be used in the region, not only in Serbia, but since most of the countries in the region are inclining to the European Union.
Thank you. Well, I was involved in one FP7 project. It's called Anvil, and you can find it on the internet. It's an acronym of analysis of civil security systems in Europe. 22 European countries were included, among them Serbia, and with the great help from my friend, I did the country study for Serbia. And the overall conclusion of the project was no security fits for all. Actually, there is no something like universal model or something that should and can be implemented in each country. Why? Because, countries are different in terms of their culture, their administrative traditions, their history, their mind towards the use of military in civil management operations. Like in Germany, they are very sensitive, having in mind their past, and so on. And actually, all the countries are, there is a kind of tension between those pressures towards harmonization and this, unique European framework on one hand, and on the other hand, their national specificalities and so. And if we are talking about this kind of regional arrangements like DPPI, by the way, we were doing also a part of the research was regional crisis management organization, and we were in a problem to find the proper organization for our Southeastern Europe region, and we analyzed Sava Commission, Danube Commission, and the DPPI. When it comes to other regions, I mean, in Baltic countries, there is very good cooperation within the Nordic countries, Baltic countries, even with Russia in protection of Baltic Sea and so on. And can we implement best practice and their experiences in our region? I'm afraid no. Why? Again, because this different mindset. I mean, you have Austria with corporativistic culture, with the very important role of voluntary organization. You have this Nordic countries. In Iceland, crisis management is everyday living. They're each day facing volcanoes and everything, and it's something like normal, and they all feel responsible. It's not a problem for Mr. Marić when this disaster strikes. It's a problem for all of us, for the citizens. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of awareness in post-socialist countries. We blame the government even for the bad weather in the time of socialism, because we were fully aware that we are not deciding on anything. Now, I think we have to do kind of restructuring of our way of thinking and of our mind, and to find the best solutions for our region to improve the work of those organizations. They have done a great job so far, but there are still room for improvement, as Dejan said. And of course, maybe there are still some obstacles, like recent memories, what happened in our region, and some unsolved questions like between Croatia and Serbia, the border questions and so on. But I think the trust is being building again, and they have a very good perspective.
But I want to add another perspective, and that is global geopolitics. Serbia is maybe lucky because Serbia can count, or Serbia can call both Russia, European Union, and anybody else, even the neighbors, despite the near past. But what about the others? I mean, would Slovenia or would Croatia be in the same position to ask Russia for help at this moment, considering what is happening in Europe, Professor?
Well, the global political situation, of course, have the consequences even on this.
Floods.
Yeah, yes, I'm afraid so. We are now in process of defining this humanitarian center in Niš, which caused a lot of controversies. Is it a Russian base? Is it now endangering our European way, and so on? It is very bad thing that those questions are politicized, but that's the world that we live in. And these Serbian positions, I mean, during President Tito, we had win-win strategy and we have benefits from both sides, but now I'm afraid that we can also take a lose-lose strategy, and we can be punished from both sides if we are not skillful enough. And you know,
even when it comes to the disaster, because in Serbia we saw both emergency units from Russia and from European Union and from the region fighting the same enemy.
We have to very carefully balance between two sides.
Yeah, we had a question there.
Ljubojević, Istok, a couple of years ago, I think 4 or 5, I did a documentary about this emergency situation management in Serbia that was aired on the radio television of Serbia, and I interviewed, among others, you, Mr. Marić. And even back then, you mentioned the importance of education as part of prevention. You mentioned that nothing happened in the meantime. Where did the things get stuck? Who is the party that needs to be addressed? Is it the Ministry of Education, or who would be in charge of pushing that kind of initiative to have more awareness raising in our public, especially among the youth, which I believe a lot of youngsters do not even know how to give first aid if needed to somebody. Another issue that I want to address is, as a professional, I was very interested in observing how the information flow during the days of the floods. We witnessed some private initiatives by some students, I think, from the Faculty of Organizational Sciences, who launched immediately their website. I think it was called Poplave or something, that saw a lot of hits. Did you make any kind of preliminary analysis on the information flow and how the key stakeholders, especially how the people affected by the floods, were informed at that time, whether something can be improved, and also what is the regional practice? Is there some kind of a specific websites that can be established to actually share and disseminate information immediately? And what's your impression how the public, how much did they actually use the Ministry of Interior website and the information coming from your side, and how did basically that information flow look like? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. The first part of the question, yes, Minister for Education, we do our best in past 5 years to change something, but nothing changed. Maybe it's problem in me. I'm not a politician, you know. I'm sitting in the 22 roads and want to do something in the first row. I don't know. But I tell you one thing, we do again, and again. Until the end of October, I knock on the door again and again and again. We must change something. Our children doesn't know anything about to help yourself. And it's one kind of thing. And sorry, Ivana, because it's a last part of the question. I think it's good. The website is good. It's very useful. For example, we have so many problems in our ministry to change our site. You know, it's 1 month or 2.
He doesn't have his site, Sector for Emergency Situations. He has to ask the administrator, who has to ask the minister, he has to ask Ban Ki-moon, and so on. It lasts whole week.
Yes. Yeah. That's true. But you know, we do something a little bit, and you know, it's like Facebook or things like that.
But is there anything you can do without the money? We always talk we need money. What is there to be done if...
We do a lot of things without money, believe me. I'm 10 years do a lot of things without...
But forcefully, I thought that voluntarily, yeah.
Yes, actually, I think it's a lot of work is done without money. It's not always the question of money, but the systematic is the most important thing about, you know, not only the uniforms, the vehicle, the things like that, but the whole system. It needs money, you know. And somebody asks about the action plan for national strategy. It's the question of money. It's not, you know, the goodwill on the paper.
We make permanent efforts to build capacity of hydrometeorological services of all the Sava River countries. I mean, the hydromet services are crucial in the prevention phase of, at least for flood and drought management. So, and we do that by fundraising, I mean, finding money elsewhere, not asking the countries to invest into this, but organizing this from externally financed projects. So at least that part is, I would say, improving significantly. And also connections, relationships between the hydromet services staff is improving. So, but that is only one piece of chain, of course. Yeah.
Can I just add? I'm very sorry. But it's very important. I mean, DPPI has been sort of advocating that kind of educational part. Like for the last couple of years, we've been trying to mainstream disaster risk reduction as a concept into our program, and we've been very, very successful. And Serbia has been also part of it, and all the other member countries within a very specific regional program on disaster risk reduction. And this project also addressed the fact that there hasn't been any disaster risk reduction mainstreamed in schools. What we did, for example, this year, and what we're going to do next year, we're going to keep that activity in the program, is the DRR, which is the disaster risk reduction, the awareness of the disaster risk reduction for school teachers. We had a fantastic activity where we had school teachers, and I have to say, again, be a little bit too Serbian. We actually had a Serbian teacher from Kraljevo coming there and literally knocking us all down. You know, what he had already done in his little classroom with his students on the subject of disaster risk reduction, addressing, you know, mainly the earthquakes because of Kraljevo and the floods that just happened. So now we know that these people from all the region, from all the countries, we actually had the director of the primary school coming to our training. And I'm sure, and I have already seen some of their reports, when they went back, their reports went to the state secretary within the Ministry of Education. So we are really doing something. It may be a slow process, but I hope that this will also accelerate the process in Serbia as in all the other countries.
We have to wrap up now, and my final question for all that you can answer probably in short sentences would be, what have we learned from God's mistake? Ivana.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, I knew that already before it happened, because we are discussing what are the worst case scenarios in DPPI. But I mean, I have one sentence stuck in my mind because I was glued to the television when flooding happened in Serbia, and I remember Mr. Marić repeating the sentence afterwards, I mean, even more recently, people, this is something that, you know, even if it happened anywhere else, it's such a huge scale that you cannot expect from any country to react perfectly or to actually be able to deploy all the capacities that one country should have. So what we have learned is now what we need to make sure to not stop talking that what needs to be changed and what needs to be implemented. The disaster risk management awareness at the top political level is a must, and that's all.
Yes, sir.
Well, do you think that Serbia is a country that learns on its mistakes?
But not
the last
professional
200 years.
Serbia,
Yes, but what is important? Of course, there are lessons learned, but what is important for me is it just ritual learning, or is it just learning among the narrow cycle of professionals? Should we leave everything to the enthusiasm like the teacher, or should we build the system? How can we translate those experiences and lessons learned into normative framework, into laws and bylaws, and into practice? That's the most important question. And we will see how much we have learned in next crisis.
Actually, you know, nobody beats the nature, even the American, Russia, Serbia also. But we must change. We must change ourselves. The politician must change our way of thinking about those problems. And my final words: it's a prevention. It's the weakest step in Serbia system.
Thank you. I've been hydraulic engineer for years, and actually I didn't learn a lot from this event. I know that it was not a God's mistake, but a natural phenomenon. So, I mean, we really have to simply adapt to the fact that we have to live with floods, and the concept living with floods has been promoted by the Netherlands in early 90s, 20 years ago, and they give more space to the river everywhere they can. And it is our advantage that we still left a lot of space around our rivers. So we don't to make any step back, but only to continue efforts. And actually what is the main feeling for me or about the follow-up of these events and recovery actions of the countries is to ratify the protocol on flood protection that was developed through the Sava Commission and start implementing this international law in order to reduce risk, to prevent future floods, and also to agree on how to react in emergency situations, how to assist one another.
Thank you. Thank you for the excellent questions. Thank you, and comments, of course. Thank you for the answers. I was very grateful to be part of this panel. Thank you.